Okay, we've been practicing long division and partial quotients with decimals. Let's take a look at a couple more examples. This one, we're going to look at long division first. If we have 136 and 8/10, and we're dividing that by 3, we're going to put our 136 and 8/10 inside our division sign, and our 3 is going to go on the outside. We've been talking about this 3 and how it doesn't have a decimal that's in front of it. So technically, anytime we have a whole number, we know that there's a decimal to the right of it. As long as the decimal is to the right of it and it's a whole number, we don't need to move it. So the only thing we have to do with the decimal is we're going to take this decimal inside the number that's being divided and put it up in our quotient or our answer. Now we're going to divide, and we're going to completely ignore this decimal here because we know where it belongs in our answer, so we can divide this like we normally would for long division. I know that 3 is not going to go into 1, so I'm going to put a 0 here to hold that place value. I know 3 is going to go into 13. I can do that 4 times. 4 times 3 gives me 12. When I subtract, I do 3 minus 2 is 1. 1 minus 1 is 0. I'm going to bring down my 6. 3 is going to go into 16 5 times. 5 times 3 will give me 15. When I subtract, 6 minus 5 is 1. 1 minus 1 is 0. Now I'm going to bring my 8 all the way down. Notice we didn't do anything with that decimal. We don't care about it right now. I know 3 will go into my 18 6 times. I'm going to be careful when I put that 6 up here. Notice that each one of my numbers so far is on top of a digit that's being divided. My 6 has to go on top of this 8 to the right of that decimal. I know 6 times 3 will give me 18. So when I subtract, I will have 0, so I have no remainder. So my answer here is 45 and 6/10. Okay, let's take a look at the same number, 136 and 8/10, and we're dividing by 3. Only this time, let's look at it if you're doing partial quotients. So we're dividing by 3 here. We talked about putting our decimal right up in our answer. I'm going to ask myself, I'm going to think of a number that's as large as I can that's going to fit inside. I'm going to ignore that there's a decimal here, erase it if it helps you think of it. So this is 1,368. How close can I get to that? Well, I know 3 times 100 would give me 300. I think I could go larger than that. I know 3 times 3 would give me 9. I know 3 times 4 would give me 12. Could I do 3 times 400? That would give me 1,200. That would probably be as close as I can get while using numbers that are in my head. We said 3 times 4 gives me 12, and then I have 2 more zeros here. When I subtract, I do 8 minus 0 is 8, 6 minus 0 is 6, 3 minus 2 is 1, and 1 minus 1 is 0. Now I have 168. Okay, similarly, let's say if I think about numbers that I know off the top of my head, maybe this time I'm going to use 3 times 30, because I know 3 times 30 would give me 90. When I subtract that, 8 minus 0 is 8. Can't do 6 minus 9, so I'm going to borrow from my 1. My 6 becomes a 16. 16 minus 9 gives me 7. I'm thinking I can't do another 90, so maybe I know 3 times 20 is going to give me 60. So I will subtract that, and I will be left with 18. Okay, now this is a good number that I can finish with. I know that 3 times 6 will give me 18. When I subtract that, I have 0 left over. When I add up my numbers, 0, 0, 0, and 6 will give me 6. 0 plus 3 plus 2 would give me 5. And then 4 is the only digit I have in the hundreds place. We said we have to be careful because we're not done yet. We're going to take our 4, 5, 6 and line it up here on the top. My 6 is going to line up all the way on the right. My 5 needs to go on top of my 6, and my 4 goes on top of my 3. So as long as I started out this problem by putting this decimal right up into my answer, if I line up my answer digits to the right, I'll have 45 and 6/10. which is exactly what we had here when we did it with long division. Let's look at one more that we can see with both methods. This time I have 1 575 thousandths divided by 25 hundredths. So now the number that's being that we're dividing by has a decimal in it, so that changes things. If we're doing this with long division and we set up our division problem, we know that we can't have a decimal in front or to the left of the number that's being divided here. So I have to move that decimal to make this a whole 25. So I need to move that 2 place values to the right. Whatever I do here in the front, I have to do here inside the division sign as well. So I need to move that decimal 2 places to the right. So now my decimal starts in between my 7 and my 5, so that's where it has to go in my answer. We've talked about erasing this or doing this beforehand so that I don't like to have all these arrows in the middle of my problem. So if it helps you to move that 20 or move that decimal at the very beginning up here, you can do that. Just remember that this is the number that you have to look at first to see how many places do I have to move, and then move this one. So now I'm going to actually divide. I know 25 is going to go into 0 or go into 1 0 times. I know 25 doesn't go into 15, so I'm going to hold that spot with a 0. I know 25, ooh, how many times is that going to go into 150 or 157? I know I can get to 150. So think, if it helps you multiplying it out on the side, think about how many quarters you would need. 25 cents is 1 quarter. I know that there's 4 quarters in $1, so I'm thinking it's going to be 6, but let's double check. If I have 6 times 5, I'm going to get 30. 6 times 2 gives me 12, plus 3 gives me 5. So 150, I was correct. So I'm going to put my 6 on top of my 7. And we said 6 times 25 is 150. I'm going to subtract. 7 minus 0 is 7. That gives me 0. That gives me 0. I'm going to bring down my 5. I'm ignoring that there's a decimal there. I know 25 goes into 75 3 times. 3 times 25 gives me 75. And I have 0 as a remainder. So my answer here is 6 3/10. Let's take a look at the exact same problem, only let's do this one with partial quotients. So we have 1 575 thousandths divided by 25 hundredths. So same idea. We're going to set this up, and we know, just like we talked about in our other problem, we can't have this as 25 hundredths, so I need to move my decimal to make this a whole number. I moved it 2 times, so I'm going to move this one 2 times. My decimal starts in between my 7 and my 5. Same as the other one, I'm going to get rid of this. This is going to be too confusing to see all of this arrows going on. So maybe it would help you to see that you're moving your decimal here, and then you're moving your decimal here so you can keep your arrows there. So my decimal starting in between my 7 and my 5, I'm going to put it up here in my answer. I'm going to ask myself how many times 25 can go into 1,575. I'm going to ignore that the decimal's there right now. Well, let's see. I know that 25, and I'm going to write this on the side, 25 times 4 is going to give me 100. So if I wanted to get to 1,000, I know I can do 25 times 40, because 25 times 4 would give me my 100, and then I'm going to add 1 more 0. When I subtract, that gives me 5, 7, 5, and 0. I'm going to ignore that decimal. I'm not even going to bring it down. Now I need to ask myself, what could I use next? Maybe the next number that pops out to you is going to be a 10, because 25 times 10 would give us 250. And I know 5 minus 0 is 5, and 7 minus 5 is 2, and 5 minus 2 is 3. Maybe I will take out another 10 here on the side and do another 250, because that's one I can do off the top of my head. 5 minus 0 gives me 5. Can't do 2 minus 5, so I'm going to borrow from my 3. My 2 becomes a 12. 12 minus 5 gives me 7. So now I have 75 left. Well, especially if I think about my quarters, if I think about money, I know that 3 quarters would give me 75 cents. So 25 times 3 would give me 75, and I subtract and I have 0 left over. When I add up my partial quotients, 0, 0, 0, and 3 gives me 3, and 4 plus 1 is 6. So my answer is not 63. Remember, we have to take our 63, bring it all the way back up here to the top, and line it up starting with the first number on the right. So my 3 goes on the right, my 6 goes to the next number, so my answer here is 6 3/10.